My name is Sarah Campbell. I'm 38, a lieutenant in the United States Army, and the kind of daughter who sends flowers on birthdays even from the edge of a war zone. I've spent the last 15 years moving between bases, briefing rooms, and operations centers, but nothing in my military career prepared me for the battle I found myself in last fall. A probate hearing in a small courtroom where my sister sat across from me in a designer suit, trying to cut me out of our mother's will. Mom had passed only 2 months earlier. The loss still sat heavily in my chest, not fully processed. But Lisa, my older sister, wasted no time filing a petition to become the sole executor of the estate, claiming I was emotionally and professionally unqualified to handle our family's properties. That was her phrasing. And sitting in that courtroom, watching her deliver those words with an icy kind of grace, I felt something splinter deep inside me. The judge, a quiet man with reading glasses low on his nose, glanced between us like he was already exhausted. Lisa's lawyer took the floor first. He was smooth, polished, and had clearly been paid enough to make me look like an irresponsible drifter. He opened by listing my deployments as if they were evidence of instability. "Your Honor," he said, "Miss Campbell has spent the majority of her adult life abroad, in transient military positions, with no fixed residence, no experience in financial management, and no relevant education in estate law or business operations." I sat still at our table, hands folded neatly over my skirt. My uniform, formal and pressed, felt like armor. I didn't flinch. I'd faced insurgents with less venom than my sister's attorney, but when he gestured to me with that smug half-smile and said, "She's just a soldier," it hit harder than any blast I've survived. Lisa didn't even blink. She looked over at me briefly, the same way she used to glance at me during high school debates when she knew she'd already won. Her entire argument rested on the assumption that I was lesser. That was because I hadn't built a law firm or bought property or married someone with a six-figure income. I was somehow incapable of responsibility. What no one in that room seemed to care about was that I had spent the last decade and a half leading teams under pressure, managing high-risk operations, and making decisions that affected lives. That in my world, competence wasn't measured in courtroom performances or spreadsheets. It was measured in trust, in silence, in the weight of what you carried and never told anyone. But none of that counted in this courtroom. Here, I was the younger sister who had run off to join the military instead of staying home to climb some polished ladder. To them, I was the unstable one, the wanderer, the soldier who didn't understand the real world. The thing that stung wasn't the insult itself. I've been called worse, often by people who didn't know better. What cut deepest was that it came from my own sister, the person who used to share my bedroom, who held my hand at Mom's funeral, who now sat across from me, trying to paint me as some naive, rigid soldier who couldn't be trusted with a family home. I didn't say a word as the hearing continued. My lawyer had advised me to stay composed. Let them speak. Let them underestimate you. I've learned over the years that silence isn't weakness. Sometimes a strategy. Still, sitting there, I couldn't help but feel a quiet rage simmering beneath my ribs, not the kind that explodes, the colder kind, the kind that settles deep and waits. Because Lisa didn't know who I really was. And soon, neither would the court. Growing up, I was always the quiet one. Lisa was the star, the debate team captain, the straight-A student who always knew the right thing to say and the right way to say it. I wasn't dumb, but I wasn't polished either. And in a house that valued appearances and achievement, being quiet made you invisible. When I told my parents I wanted to join the army, my father just stared at me over his glasses and said, "Why?" My mother cried for a week. Lisa rolled her eyes and told me not to romanticize uniforms. I remember her exact words. "You'll be back home in a year when you realize it's all discipline and dirt." She said it like she was doing me a favor, as if crushing my ambition early would save me the trouble. But I didn't come back. I stayed. I pushed through basic, through the early years of chaos and mistakes, and found something I never had at home: purpose. It didn't matter that no one clapped for me when I graduated from officer school. I didn't do it for applause. I did it because, out there, I mattered. In Afghanistan, I learned to sleep through distant shelling. In Kuwait, I handled logistics for operations I still can't speak about. I spent birthdays alone, missed my father's funeral because I was grounded in Germany during a security lockdown, and buried more friends than I care to count. I stopped keeping track of time during the holidays. I measured it in deployments, rotations, and the names on memorial walls. Lisa sent emails on Christmas. Generic, two-line check-ins. No real questions, no calls. Once, when I was in Mosul, she mailed me a card that read, "Hope you're staying safe. Come visit soon." I laughed out loud. The irony of that wish, in a place where we wore body armor to the mess hall, was almost poetic. I didn't tell her much. I didn't tell anyone, really. It's easier that way. My job required silence, discretion, and the ability to blend in. So, I let her believe what she wanted. That I was just another supply officer, a cog in the wheel. That I filed paperwork, shipped boxes, and saluted people who made real decisions. She never asked what I did, never once. Not when I went dark for weeks during a mission. Not when I came home early after a teammate was killed by a roadside bomb. Not when I earned my promotion to lieutenant. She didn't even know I had a rank. I think part of me stopped expecting anything from her. We grew up in the same house, but lived in different worlds. She was at parties and fundraisers and law school weekends in wine country. I was in sandstorms, forward operating bases, and coffee from instant packets while watching drone feeds at 3 a.m. Sometimes I wondered if she knew how deep the gap had grown. Maybe she just didn't care. Or maybe it made things easier for her to keep me as a story she could simplify. My sister's in the military. She moves around a lot. That was her line. Clean, digestible. No need to explain what I actually did or what it cost me. What she never understood was that I chose this path, not because I had nothing else, but because I needed something more, something real. I needed a life where I didn't have to perform or compete for praise I'd never receive. So I kept my silence. I let her win the family spotlight. Let her hold court at holiday dinners while I sipped wine and listened. I didn't correct her when she said things that were wrong or made assumptions that belittled me. Not because I was weak, but because I didn't need her to understand. I knew who I was. Until now, that was enough. But sitting in that courtroom, hearing her try to strip me of any claim to our mother's legacy, I realized something had changed. This wasn't just about a house or a bank account. It was about being seen. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to let her look away. Lisa stood with perfect posture, her voice calm and deliberate, like she was reciting closing arguments in one of her high-profile cases. She started by expressing how deeply she respected my service, how grateful we all were for my sacrifices. It was the kind of gratitude that comes wrapped in condescension, polished just enough to sound sincere. Then came the pivot. She told the judge that while I may be brave, bravery didn't equal competence. Managing a family estate, especially one with multiple rental properties and investments, required a different kind of experience, the kind I didn't have. She smiled politely as she said it, that I'd spent the last 15 years moving from base to base, with no financial ties, no roots, no business education. My sister is rarely even in the country, she said. She can't commit to being present, let alone manage tenants, contracts, or property upkeep. He sat still. My lawyer had warned me not to interrupt. Let her talk. Let her reveal who she really is. But it was hard. Every word from her mouth was like sandpaper on an open wound. Not because it was all lies, but because it was curated truth. She told the court I hadn't seen Mom in the last year of her life, which was true. What she didn't say was that I was in Syria helping coordinate a relief corridor between two Allied zones. I missed the funeral because I was the only one in my unit with clearance to run logistics for a high-risk extraction. She left that out because it didn't fit the picture she wanted to paint. Lisa called herself the stable one, the sister who had been there, who handled the doctor visits, the hospice care, and the bills. I don't say this to diminish Sarah, she added sweetly, but she's always lived in a very structured world. The military tells her where to go, when to move, and what to do. That's not the same as running a business. There's no room for improvisation, for vision. The judge nodded, scribbling notes. I couldn't read his face, but I could feel the weight of his silence. Lisa was winning him over. She was smooth, persuasive, and well prepared. And she was making me look like a footnote. My hands were folded in my lap, knuckles white. I kept my face neutral, the way I'd been trained to under pressure. But inside I was burning, not with anger, with clarity. This wasn't just a legal strategy. It was the story Lisa had told herself for years. That I'd chosen a life of escape. That I'd run from responsibility while she stayed and carried the weight. She ended her statement with a flourish. This estate needs leadership. And with all due respect, my sister has never led anything outside the chain of command. Her lawyer nodded along like a proud coach. The judge leaned back in his chair. I didn't look at Lisa. I couldn't. If I did, I might forget why I was there. I wasn't trying to prove her wrong. I was trying to show the court who I really was. But in that moment, I realized the only way to do that was to stop hiding. And soon, I wouldn't have to say a word. The truth was about to speak for itself. My lawyer stood slowly, his voice calm but carrying a weight the room hadn't heard yet. "Your Honor," he said, "we would like to submit to the court a recently declassified file regarding my client's service record." He handed a thick folder to the clerk, and as it passed into the judge's hands, I saw Lisa's lawyer lean forward, his smirk faltering for the first time all morning. The judge flipped through the pages, his brows lifting with each line. He stopped writing notes. He just read. The air in the room shifted, the low buzz of whispering from the gallery fading into silence. I could feel Lisa's eyes on me, sharp with confusion, like she was looking at a stranger. My lawyer's voice cut through the stillness. Contrary to what has been presented, my client is not simply a supply officer. She is a commissioned captain in the United States Army who has spent the last 5 years coordinating and managing high-level logistics for strategic operations overseas. He paused, letting the words hang. She was also the lead officer on a joint task force that dismantled a multi-million-dollar smuggling network, funneling stolen military equipment through Allied ports. Lisa blinked hard. "What?" she whispered, though no one answered. Her attorney flipped another page, his face draining of color. The judge set the file down slowly and looked at me with a new expression, not the bored resignation of earlier, but a sharp, assessing focus. My lawyer gestured to the back of the room. "We have also called a witness, Your Honor." The heavy doors opened, and a tall man in a dark army dress uniform walked in, ribbons glinting under the fluorescent lights. His presence was immediate, commanding. He was my commanding officer, Colonel James Porter. The courtroom fell completely silent as he approached the stand. Even the clerk seemed to forget to breathe. After being sworn in, he adjusted the microphone and looked directly at the judge. "I am Colonel James Porter, United States Army. Captain Sarah Campbell has served under my command for over 4 years." His voice was steady but carried an authority that filled the room. "Captain Campbell has overseen the movement and protection of military assets valued at hundreds of millions of dollars. She has negotiated with international partners, coordinated multi-agency operations, and maintained security under conditions far more volatile than anything we see here." He turned his gaze briefly toward Lisa. "I can state without hesitation that she possesses exceptional leadership, integrity, and operational expertise." I watched Lisa's face as the words landed. Her lips parted slightly, her eyes darting from the colonel to me. The careful mask she had worn all day cracked. She looked like she was trying to find footing on a floor that had just vanished beneath her. "Colonel Porter wasn't finished. If this court is concerned about my officer's ability to manage property and resources," he said firmly, "I would submit that she has already done so at a scale and under pressures far beyond the scope of this estate. Captain Campbell is one of the most capable leaders I have had the privilege to command." The judge leaned back, his hands folded, and for a moment, no one spoke. The silence was heavy, electric. I felt my heartbeat slow. my breath steady. Years of being underestimated, dismissed, and ignored had built to this instant. I didn't have to argue. I didn't have to plead. The truth was standing beside me in uniform. When the judge finally spoke, his voice was low but different now, edged with respect. "Captain Campbell," he said, "it seems I have been misinformed." He glanced at Lisa and her lawyer, whose polished confidence had evaporated. The tide had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't the one being looked down on. I was the one being seen. The judge's voice rang out clearly, final and firm. "This court denies the petition to remove Captain Sarah Campbell as co-executor. Both parties will retain equal authority over the estate, with full legal standing." I didn't smile. I just nodded, quiet and composed. But inside, something long buried finally loosened. Lisa didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her eyes said enough. They were wide and unsettled. But there was something else there, too. Shame. Maybe regret. Or maybe the slow, dawning realization that the story she'd clung to about me no longer held up. We stood beside each other as the room emptied. Her lawyer whispered something and quickly left. Lisa stayed, frozen in place for a beat too long. Then she turned to me and said softly, "I didn't know." Her voice cracked just enough to sound human. I met her eyes, calm and steady. "It's not about the inheritance," I said. "It's about being seen." She looked away. No defense, no apology. Just silence. Finally honest. Outside, the sunlight felt sharper than I remembered. I stepped down the courthouse steps alone, my boots hitting the pavement with quiet certainty. The air was cool, crisp. Somewhere in the distance, a car horn broke the stillness, but I barely heard it. I stood across the street from the house, the one Mom had worked so hard to keep. The shutters needed painting, and the porch light was flickering, but it was still home. I hadn't been inside in over a year. I wondered if it would still smell like her. A breeze caught the edge of my jacket, fluttering the insignia on my shoulder. People passed by without noticing. Just another woman in uniform on her way somewhere. But in that moment, I wasn't invisible. Not to myself. Not anymore. All those years I stayed quiet, kept my head down, chose the mission over recognition. It wasn't a mistake. It made me who I am. But now, for the first time, I felt something different. Not pride, not vindication, just peace. The truth had spoken, and it had spoken loud enough for even my sister to hear.